And we're back. Pleasure after trauma, part two. So, I want to share my book with you all before I start talking about this. Get into our next subject, or not our next subject, but before I get into our next piece of this work. So, yesterday I talked about the work of Gabor Mate and his approach to understanding trauma. And to review that, it is Dr. Gabor Mate and how he defines that trauma is not the event that happens. That event is a traumatic event, but the trauma is actually the experience that's left behind in the body after we navigate those experiences. So I want to introduce my book to you all, and it's A Return to Pleasure. And this is the second book in the Return to Pleasure series. And this book focuses on moving from grief to liberation, heal the past, reclaim the future, and disrupt the timelines of generational sexual harm. My coming into this, and I can actually just read the back of the book. It says, I'm a third generation sexual trauma survivor. When I learned that this was the story woven through my body and my mother's body and my mother's body, I knew I was being called to examine and address the ways we hold these stories and heal these memories, especially within the body. As a sensual movement practitioner for the last 15 plus years, I have been dedicated to helping women and those across the feminine spectrum, regardless of gender, class, or geography, return to their bodies and reclaim the erotic as holy and integral to our aliveness, especially after trauma. So I'm going to find a passage here in the book, page 186. I did my Google random number generator, and uh, this is actually a story about my grandmother. Um, wow. So I'm not going to read that full. I'm not going to read this full story because it's a bit long. But essentially, in my mom's transition and as she was in her hospice journey, I was able to come back to um, searching for our blood family on her side because she heard that she might have had some siblings, but it wasn't really clear. And we just didn't have a lot of information. And shortly before she passed, I located her birth family and also gave her the opportunity to, or not gave, but facilitated the opportunity for her to meet her sister, her older sister, for the first time, and her niece. It was really incredible and also very challenging because within that unraveling, we found a lot of information about my grandmother and just, you know, information about her life story and her history. My grandmother had her first child at the age of 9, and we can all piece together a story. a child having having a child at the age of 9 is the result of neglect, is the result of assault, is the result of abuse. And it really took me by storm that this generational story, that the story of harm, of sexual harm, was literally replicating itself from my mother's mother to my mother to me. And I thought about what does it mean to, one, deal with the grief of what those experiences leave behind in our bodies, and also what to do with finding a sense of agency, autonomy, and healing in our experience of our sexuality, even after we've navigated distressing experiences. And so when I think about this idea of allowing ourselves to experience pleasure after trauma, it is very much so rooted in resistance. It's very much so rooted in not allowing systemic harm to take the joy out of life, to take the connection and desire and the erotic desire and the hunger out of life. And whether that plays out through our sexual experiences with other people or with ourselves, or just being in a state of, again, aliveness and vitality, which is what our erotic self is. And yesterday I actually recorded a full video, and it cut off, but there was a point where I, remember distinctly us talking about, um, what is the opposite of trauma? The opposite of trauma is vitality. The opposite of trauma is peace of mind. The opposite of trauma is self agency and self ownership. The opposite of trauma is knowing that you are safe. And so when we're thinking about reclaiming those experiences for ourselves, especially within our experiences of intimacy, especially within our experiences of being able to cultivate our erotic self, is really crucial. We can't have that sense of openness and vastness and, pleasure and all of these really yummy things if we're not feeling safe, if we're feeling vulnerable in the not in the spiritual sense of being vulnerable and open and pliable, but vulnerable in the sense of a weakened, and not able to care for ourselves or tend to the things that we need. Like, if we're in those spaces, it's really hard to have some type of expansive or delicious or, memorable experience around our sexuality that, feels pleasurable. And so we have to acknowledge the things within our own intimate timeline history. It's in the book. If you want to know what that is, the whole practice of understanding your intimate timeline history is in the book. And I walk you through a practice of being able to map, what your experiences have been throughout your life regarding your intimate self, and how those things begin to show up in other areas, and how they show up recurringly, how they show up in a recurring fashion, um, in the different seasons. So how is that also impacting the way that you're showing up in your body, in your life, in your relationship, etc.? So we have to acknowledge the experiences that we've had that are the antithesis to vitality and aliveness. We have to acknowledge all of the experience, because some of them are not, again, like I was saying yesterday, some of them are not purely sexual in nature. It can be relational harm. It can be the harm of losing our sense of trust in people around us, losing a sense of trust in a partner. Like, all of those things can really contribute to the way in which we show up in our sexual self. And so if we're not tending to those things, it's going to feel miserable to try to have these open and vast experiences with sex, and our bodies feel like they're in a state of distress, or they're unstable, or we just don't feel like we have a total grip on our self, our personhood. And so I think there's three things that you can really tend to when you're thinking about giving yourself the space to come back to your sensual self, your erotic self, while navigating experiences of trauma. And I think the first thing is, one, giving yourself grace. Um, if you don't give yourself grace, the shame, the confusion, the guilt, the feelings of isolation will just increase. And so, if this is important to you, and I know that it is, you're going to give yourself a chance to just be off the hook. You're off the hook. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be resolved. You don't have to be comfortable. You don't have to be confident. You don't have to be anything right now. We just need you to give yourself grace, right? And in giving yourself grace, we want to see that, things start to soften, in our sense of understanding. And with that softening, then we want to go in with a new vision. Because if you try to go in with a new vision while you're already hyper vigilant, alert, on guard, etc., it's just going to create more contention and more chaos. And that's not the goal. So we want to give ourselves grace. And then the second thing is now we want to go in with a new vision. And that new vision is completely up to you. And I say this is hard. I was talking to a friend last night, and she was like, "You have permission to do something different." And I was just like, "No, no, 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 no. I'm supposed to do it this way. This is what I was taught. This is what I understand to be valuable. This is what I understand to be um, the right way to do things. This is what I understand to be the way that's going to give me the most security. This is the way that I understand to do things that's going to make me feel the most valuable and important." And yet, instill all of those things while existing in those structures and those systems and dynamics, it wasn't making me happy. But to be able to make a choice to do something different requires a shift in perception, as A Course in Miracles, from fear to love around this new reality that I want to experience and embody. She said, "You have permission to do something different." And I was like, So you have to allow yourself the permission to create a new vision. We'll talk about it. And then the third thing is cultivating a safe space for you to practice self intimacy. Sometimes, before we can get into the experiences that we're going to have with other people and how we're going to show up in the world and what does this mean for our sense of liberation and how are we resisting, you need to have a practice that is actually for you, right? A place where you can unravel. And a lot of times, when we don't have an understanding of the sensual spectrum, the erotic spectrum, and understanding that there are multiple ways that we can come into our experience of our sexuality, it doesn't have to just be from the lens that we are constantly fed. You know, the vada, bada bada boom, and I do it. I love it. The lingerie, the makeup, the hair, the this, the attitude, the confidence. You're already there. But if there's also a space for you to come into this practice when you're grieving, when you're tired, when your body feels deeply in distress. Like, there are so many other ways for you to be able to come into your erotic body and find your way through the spectrum. So let me see if I can actually find that page really quick, because I just posted. Actually, just posted. Oh, here it is. This is a good passage to read really quick. Here we go. It says intergenerational trauma often manifests in patterns of disconnection from our bodies, our pleasure, our joy, and even our intuition. Colonization, systemic oppression, and cultural displacement have severed many of us from ancestral movement traditions that once served as sources of healing and strength. Reclaiming movement, whether through dance, ritual, or simply attuning to our breath, becomes an act of defiance, a way of choosing, a way of saying, "I choose to feel, I choose to heal, I choose to return to myself." This is the foundation of the work we do in the Messy Movement Lab. It is not about perfection or performance, but about presence. It is about finding safety in sensation, about allowing our bodies to move through and beyond the stories that they have been told. Here we honor the messy, the wild, the unrefined, the truth of our embodied experience. And in doing so, we open the door to a deeper, more liberatory way of being. As you begin cultivating your practice, I want you to remember that no matter how you're feeling, there is always a way into the practice. We embrace the concept of the sensual spectrum as our foundational understanding of how to find our way to the dance floor. When you're on a journey of toward reclaiming our sexuality, it doesn't always come with feelings of confidence and certainty. certainty right away. On the surface, on an 8 count, can feel mindless in all the best ways. But when we are truly soul searching for ways to heal, especially in how our bodies experience pleasure, intimacy, and connection after sexual trauma, the 8 count can only do so much. We need to know that there is a pathway into the work that doesn't require performance, but invites our whole self. The sensual spectrum offers various entry points for the sensual movement practice. And as you begin to cultivate your practice with intention, decide where you're starting on the spectrum and then where you're headed. So I'm going to show you a picture of the spectrum. And there is a picture of this on my page. And so it breaks it down into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different states of being. And it goes all the way from, let's start here in the expansive states. These are, or no, actually, we'll start in orgasmic because these are the states that people most commonly are, know and attached to being able to come into your erotic self. So, euphoric, rapturous, ecstatic, reverent, luminous, confident, magnetized, radiant, enchanted, devotional, sensuous, satiated. Now we go into grounded states of being with our erotic self, surrendered, flowing, tender, whole. Then we go into the more desiring states where we're longing for something, achy, edgy, unraveled, feverish, provoked. Then we go into our disoriented states, and it goes into provoked, unmoved, fractured, numb, hollow, stagnant, overstimulated, and then it just keeps going. So the point is that there's a spectrum of feeling. There's a spectrum of feeling across the board that we are navigating on a day-to-day basis. And no matter where you're at in that spectrum, there is a place for you to step into your practice. So when I'm feeling radiant, I might be up and I'm doing I'm moving a little bit quicker. I'm doing my diaspora practices that are getting my feet, my hips, my body just in just the swing of things. But when I'm tired, when I'm frustrated, when I'm angry, when I'm sad, I'm more in the desiring states. My movement may be more achy, more edgy. So I might be listening to something that's got me. It might be some rock music, some like heavy metal. I'm really pushing the edges of my erotic self because I'm trying to find ways to articulate that energy. Um, and it's not the same as when I'm up and doing more of the diasporic practices where my feet and my hips are moving like crazy, right? And then there's this space where it's like where you're feeling even going all the way over to powerlessness and disembodied. This is a space where you might even be in the practice and in the space, but you're not moving. And I talk to you all about this all the time. You may come to class and sit in the corner because that's where you are that day. The point is that you showed up. The point is that you got into the space to be able to have the support, to be among other people, to witness other people, and for you to be witnessed as well. Oh, I am speaking to myself. Yeesh. Oh my God, that's so funny. So that's part two. I think because these lessons are too vast for one video to even remotely conquer. So you let me know. What do you think?